I have now the pleasure to introduce Katherine Carton. She is the Vice President of CFLD US, but really, when you look at her, she's a serial entrepreneur, a woman dedicated to different passions for innovation and ecosystems, a woman that many like you have also seen its role in politics, being mayor of Palo Alto in Menlo Park, California. And she lived in many places. She lived in China for over 10 years, being the founder and the general director of Digital Island in Asia, which is the company of data that is the biggest in Asia at the time. Katherine also helped found Equant, VIM, and many other enterprises and startups in Asia before she moved to Silicon Valley. Later, we'll have Ramon joining her for a fireside chat. Roy is an investor, ex-managing director of Intel Corporation Startup Program, and he comes from Israel, so this is what we want to highlight. When I said the world has changed, the world has become very much a connection of dots across geographies and continents. Katherine, the floor is yours, and it is our pleasure to have you.
Excuse me. Hello, everyone. I'm so happy to be here. Yo viví muchos años pasados, casi 20 años pasados, yo viví en la selva, en Manu, en Perú. Entonces estoy muy, muy feliz de regresar con Tech y con las mujeres también. So my first question that I thought when putting this together is, why are we always so concerned about the future? What is it about the future? And as if you think about it, you, me, our neighbors, everyone we know, our pets, everyone, we're going to spend the rest of our lives in the future. So it makes sense for us to plan for it now. And as Abraham Lincoln once said, the best way to predict your future is to create it. And Stanford teaches design thinking now. And part of that program in design thinking is looking at something and really observing it, empathizing with the people that are experiencing this, designing and planning for change. But change is happening so fast now. What is now is becoming like this compared to what it was in the past. If you think about it, the printing press was created in the 1400s. It was a couple of hundred years later before we had electricity and we had the ability to communicate through telegraph. And we went from telegraph to telephone in 50 years. And then in one generation, we've gone from telephone to fax machine to the Internet of Things, to artificial reality with machines communicating, and they don't even need us to communicate anymore. We always talk about exponential growth, but what is the difference between exponential growth and linear growth? I think Martin Wazowski, who's the chief designer of SAP, explained it really well. If I take 30 steps of 1 meter each, linear steps, I start here, I take 30 steps forward, where am I going to end up? Maybe at the end of the room, maybe in the reception area. But exponential, if each of those steps is doubled and doubled, if I take 30 steps of 1 meter each, do I have any mathematicians in the room? It's very, very far. It will actually take you 25 times around the globe. That's the difference between linear and exponential growth. And that's what we're struggling with now. It's like one single note of change turning into chords, turning into a whole symphony hitting us right now. And most of the problems that we'll have in the future will be caused by technologies that look like solutions today, according to Kevin Kelly. And justifiably, a lot of the new technologies are making us nervous. Look at the CRISPR. The CRISPR's changing DNA. That's actually a little bit intimidating when we think about what the ramifications could be if we get that wrong. We look at Snapchat's day streaks is being identified now more and more as causing insomnia and anxiety in teens, so much in the US that the teens are starting to rebel against it and ask them not to have that as part of the Snapchat. Games like HoneyQuest, believe it or not, can listen to you. It turns on your microphone so that as you're playing the game, it will report back what you're listening to or what's on the TV. That's kind of creepy. Technology is really good, but it's also getting a little bit unnerving. And in particular with AI, there are a lot of scientists who are beginning to become very, very concerned about what those ramifications might be in the long term. But people like Elon Musk, who's been very vocal about being afraid of the future, is actually created a company called Neuralink with about 8 people that develops brain-computer interfaces that are implanted in people's heads. A BCI records and interprets or decodes brain signals, and these brain signals communicate with each other by sending and receiving very small electrical signals. This gentleman with this on his head can actually communicate with someone in the next room by his thoughts. Now, right now it's only yes and no, but this is happening. This is actually the reality of what's being developed right now. In Stanford University, you have this woman who's been paralyzed from the neck down. She's on a breather, but they put an implant in her head, and she can now type by thinking. I mean, isn't that wonderful? It's absolutely spectacular to me that these new things are coming. And so we have to step back and think, what is good and what is bad? You know, as these technologies come forward, what are the ramifications of what we're doing? And it's so important to remember that the technology itself isn't good or bad, it's how it's used. I have a hammer. I can hit someone over the head. I can build a house for my children. And we have to start thinking about, yes, we can do it. Should we? Probably. But we need to think more about how this is being implemented. How can it be used in the future? By people when we're no longer in control of this. A good example is right now, there is a technology in China and in places in the United States even, where if you go outside within 14 minutes of you leaving your door, they can identify where you are in the city. Now this is fantastic. In Menlo Park, where I'm from, we had a complete meltdown this summer because an elderly gentleman with Alzheimer's got loose. And he was really in danger, and it took us almost 20 hours to find him with the police and everyone looking. Children get lost. This is a fantastic technology for finding murderers as well as people that need finding. This is a very good thing. I don't think anyone in the room could disagree with that. But then you have China, and they have something called the social credit score, where they literally can track you around the city, and if you spit on the ground, 5 points off. If you're sitting on the bus and you don't give up your seat for an elderly woman, 10 points off. You stand up, you get 20 points. And how they're using this is you can get a free pass to ride the bus, or they can ban you from the bus. Or you can get more easy access to doctors. It's called Sesame Credit Score, and it's actually a reality. This isn't in theory, this is happening. And I don't know, is it good or bad? You tell me. I think it would be a little creepy to have Big Brother watching me. It's very 1984. So we have to start and think, what are the long-term ramifications? Is this good or is this bad as we move forward? So how can the implementation be managed? We evaluate long-term consequences of technologies and processes and to this end, Jane McGonigal has come up with something called the Ethical OS, and there are 8 risk zones, or 8 questions that you can ask as you're developing these things. And going into this would be a whole separate presentation, so I won't. But what I will say is Google it, download it. It's something that you can go through as a process as you look at things that might make you think of something that you hadn't considered in the past as you move forward with this. So what is it that makes a smart city? And my role, I was the mayor, alcalde de mi ciudad, and now I'm on the city council, and we work on taking technology and bringing it in and trying to make life better for our residents, for our people. And the thing that's really important to remember, whether it's the city or whether it's Intel or whether it's a startup, technology used to be on the periphery, it used to be on the edge. Now technology is becoming the center, the core of what businesses and what companies do. And as this moves forward, we have to look not only at what it's doing for our bottom line, but what it's doing for the quality of our lives. Now, one good example is Philadelphia, and I really think it's great they did this. They spent an extra $50,000 to document the change. So before they had all these processes that were done by paper, instead they put everything online. And I don't know if they used SAP or which process they used, but they put it all online. And they went from 250 hours of paid staff time to just 27 hours to do the process. That's 5 weeks of all their staff now being free. They could now do huge programs like Safe Routes to School or really make better use of the staff time to do better things for their city. And that's significant. That's a huge difference. Smart grid. Some cities have excess power, and energy is like milk. If you don't use it, you lose it. You have batteries, which are kind of like refrigerators that'll store it for a little while, but you really have to effectively figure out how to balance electricity to use it more intelligently. However, trading or sharing power and the record of that is extremely complicated. It's almost impossible to do real time in a grand scale, but blockchain can make this happen. It can make that trade, it can make that balance as it goes forward. And we're just on the edge of being able to implement that right now. Companies like Power Ledger are using blockchain technology to turn buildings into nodes in a network to actively balance the systems. And so we have a lot of really good things to look forward to on that aspect as we move forward into more green power. But I thought this was a really good example of public-private partnerships, and we talk about how to implement this. The city of San Jose had 4,000 streetlights. They're the old-fashioned, really expensive streetlights. They wanted to go in and they wanted to make them LED. This is pretty common. And the LED difference in the use of electricity means that they can actually pay for themselves over time. But they found these LED lights that actually have repeaters on top for your cell phones. And as we move from 4G to 5G in the cell phones, 4G has a larger footprint. 5G requires more repeaters to go through. So they put these through so that they not only save the polar bears by having greener energy, save money for the city, but also provide better coverage for the people that have their mobile phones and set them up for 5G. But they thought about it and they thought, well, hold on, we have 3 major wireless companies that are going to make a lot of money that we're paying to put in this infrastructure. So they did a public-private partnership with them, and they made an agreement that AT&T, Verizon, and Mobility would give them $24 million over the next 10 years to help pay for this, to help balance this. What did they do with the money? They identified families, and the way they do this in the United States, they have families that are identified in public school to have free and reduced price lunches. So they're already identified as families in need. They're providing them with a computer and broadband access for free with this money so that underprivileged children can have access to the internet, which is critical to keeping up with the other kids, to be able to do the research and be able to do your homework. So I thought this was a really fantastic example of how you start off with something pretty simple, like we need to upgrade our streetlights, and you've now made the world a better place with greener electricity, you've made better Wi-Fi ability for your people, you've helped poor students. It's a win-win-win solution. And I hope that in the future, this inspires you to reach out to your government people reach out to your tech people and work together and share that information so that we can have better solutions. Another example is adaptive signal controls. People say, oh, great, traffic lights, big deal. Traffic lights are a big deal. If you think about it, the days and hours that add up in our lives we spend in traffic, this is really important. Palo Alto is using adaptive traffic control, where you have the nodes in the traffic that can communicate with each other and provide the information, and they can even use the cameras to tell where the bike's going, where the people walking, how they're walking together, so that you can plan better for complete streets. And as this moves forward, you have Edmonton, Canada, which is using next-generation adaptive lights, which is not only helping with the traffic, they find that they're having less accidents. And that's providing information for the next generation, which is called connected vehicle technology, where the cars themselves actually talk to the traffic lights. And this is going to be critical as we move forward for the automated driving cars. So I love the fact that it's coming together, even to identify parking spaces and be able to tell cars where their parking space is open. Did you know that, and this is true worldwide, 40% of traffic in the middle of city are people driving around trying to find parking spaces. So when you say, well, who cares? You know, it's a parking space. It's a nice to have. Well, it's more than just a nice to have. It impacts the quality of life. It impacts the air quality. It impacts people's finances. It's a huge impact on people's lives. So as we move forward, this may be an obvious thing. As I look out, Roy Ramon, who's going to come up in a minute, commented, we'd love to see more events where we have this many women in the room. It's important. And you say, well, why is it important? Is this another nice to have? Well, it's not. And I looked through this and I found Harvard Business Review came out with a report that shows that companies with women CXOs and women directors actually end up with a 42% greater return on sales, 53% higher return on equity. Having just one woman on your board can cut your risk of bankruptcy by 20%. This is huge. Inclusive teams perform better during financial crises. It does make a difference to involve women in business. And I love the Madeleine Albright. There's a special place in hell for women who don't help other women. And here's some resources. There are a lot of resources within this room. There's a very interesting movie, if you haven't seen it, called Misrepresentation, where they did research and they found that statistically 10 people in the room, 8 men, 2 women, the 2 women will start competing with each other. There isn't like a chair that says this has to be the woman chair. You know, my call out to you today is to stop now and think about helping each other and supporting each other as we move forward and stop competing with one another. And I love the fact that I put this together independently of knowing what was happening with the theme here, and it's very true. We have these phrases in Silicon Valley that talk about run with scissors, fail early, fail often. You know, take risks. If you're not taking risks, if somebody's not annoyed with you, if you're not pushing the edge, you're not trying hard enough. And so I invite everyone here to run and take risks and support each other, and that is how you build an innovation ecosystem. So with that, I'd like to invite Roy Ramon to come up.
And very nice to be here, and thank you very much for inviting me. Thank you for the lovely speech. And I think now probably people are interested to hear us talk a little bit about where innovation is going, how it's created, and what's the best approach when we talk about innovation.
Well, people keep talking about the world becoming more distributed. We hear about blockchain, we hear about sharing of information. What does that mean, and what do you see that being the impact on the new companies as they come forward, and how people are doing business?
So I think one of the greatest challenges we have as investors is to try to find the trend at the right time, because distributed is something that has been floating around for many years, and aligning with the right timing to a specific problem is where things become difficult, because success in business, it's not only the idea, it's not only the execution, but it's also the timing. You can be ahead of the big wave. So when we talk about the distributed technology, and some of you know blockchain or you know Bitcoin, And another type of such technologies, the main idea behind the distributed technology is that it's going to evolve the way that we talk and communicate about data. So today, data is stored on a server. The server is owned by one of the big tech mammoths like Google, Amazon, and they control the data. They know what's happening. They're the only one that can use it. They can sell it to you. They can allow you to use it, but not necessarily they're willing to do that. When we look about the distributed technologies, once we are able to take the data and start to distribute it to a lot of other nodes, we'll create a big competition to these big players. And my bet is in the next five years, the next big unicorn or big company would be a company that will run distributed database or distributed AI over, it can be blockchain and other distributed technology. And that is where is the new emerging technologies will be the ability to not have a centralized location where, or a server where you have all the data, but we'll have multiple edge computing or fragmented database that you can then aggregate using these technologies. A bit long, but I hope.
So why is there such an exponential growth of technology today? It seems to be going faster and faster, and what is the fuel that's making that happen?
So, as you said previously, I think in your lecture, you said it very well, the pace that things are moving now is enormous. If I'm not without my phone for even a day, I lose a complete different hype that was there and vanished. One of the reasons is, first of all, if we look, there are three main catalysts. One is the new algorithms that are coming through. So the algorithms are mainly in the AI and distributed technologies. These new algorithms create a new type of computational benefits, and that's a huge factor for the advance in technology. The second part is the amount of data that is collected. Along the last 30 years of compute, we have collected mountains, terabytes or gigabytes of data. And today, it's just going and increasing. The amount of sensors we have in a room or in our home, in our car, is enormous. All of that is generating a lot of data. So there is a representation of the physical world in the digital world. And that creates a huge advantage and something that a lot of startups, a lot of companies are utilizing and basically building on that to generate new businesses. And these two, the algorithms and the data, are a big catalyst for new technologies to emerge. And I think that along the next 2 to 3 years, we'll see that just growing and growing because the amount of sensors that we have is constantly growing. And you see the data is affecting our life from mobility, so new autonomous vehicles, which are around the corner, and to medical and how you consume drugs or how you even produce drugs.
So it's funny, the speaker before was talking about Siri, and I have, my husband brought one of those things home, and I have to say it creeps me out. It's always listening to me. Yesterday, I was in New York with someone, and his phone was sitting next to me, and we were just chatting, and the phone thought I said, "Hey Siri." I don't know what I said, but the phone was convinced I was talking to it, and just went off. And we actually have had a situation in the United States where someone got the right to tap someone's phone, and that extended to their BMW satellite phone. And someone was in their car talking about a drug deal, and the US government was listening and arrested them. And then it became an issue. The guy's phone wasn't even in the car. Did that right from the judge to tap a telephone extend to someone's car? We have a video game now, Honey something, I can't remember, that listens to you as you play. You know, that's creepy. And I understand that on one hand, people say, well, we're tracking you so we don't annoy you with advertisements that are irrelevant. This makes it easier for you and better for you. And I understand why they're doing that, but there's that line on privacy that I'm not so sure I'm completely comfortable with all the time. So as we move forward with this, I see people are getting more and more concerned about their privacy, but also with cybersecurity. So did you want to talk a little bit more about what's happening to make cybersecurity that much more of an issue, really in the past year than it has been before?
So I think that the main reason that today cybersecurity, not as it was 10 years ago, and 10 years ago, an IT manager would care about cybersecurity, and today most of us think about cybersecurity. One is, as I mentioned before, the penetration of the digital world on the physical world. So now a cyber hack can take a car with his passenger and damage real world people, really damage them physically, not just take their data. And we see a lot of data analytics that are able to exploit people, utilize their weaknesses, influence them, influence elections. And that's a great change in the way that we perceive data today. So dividing cybersecurity to the privacy components and to the protection component. I think that on the privacy, we all need to be concerned and aware of that. Do we have anything to do? Personally, as individuals, there's not a lot to do. Because even if you don't share your contact with Facebook, your friend did. So they have your contacts. And if you are not posting any pictures online, you know, I did, so you're all in the picture anyway. So as individuals, we have not a lot to do with privacy. As a collective, we do. As a collective, we have an ability to influence decision makers. We have the ability to influence companies in order to create a genuine change in the way that the technology is being utilized. The second part of that is the ethics. What is ethical today? And this is something I think we talked about it about 2 days or 3 days ago, is how do you consume the data, and how is the society is evolving with new ethical, what's wrong, what's okay, what's not okay. Is that okay to monitor your data? Is that okay to tap into someone's car? All of these are something that we as a society need to understand, that our cultural behavior, our moral rights needs to change as fast as the technology is changing. And last is the ability and complexity of attacks. So this is the second part. So we talked about privacy, is the complexity of attacks. Today, attacks becoming more and more complex. We see even targeting individuals with state capabilities. So these things have never been identified before. And I think that that's a new leap in ransomware, in ability to penetrate computers, penetrate systems. And this is something that there is a huge advantage for people that are creating that protection, but also it's something that we need to educate ourselves and educate our peers and other people, because not necessarily you'll be the break point, but someone next to you can be the break point and then can affect you. So it's all about education as well.
Yeah, this gets back to what's good and what's bad. I was actually reading the other day that, I won't say which one, but one of the genealogy companies now, you can scrape the inside of your lip and they'll come back and tell you where your people come from. They actually caught a rapist that way. He'd actually sent his DNA in. And at first you think, well, that's fantastic. We have this horrible rapist off the street. And then you think, hold on, how did they get that information? Isn't that private? And so that line on what's good for society and what's not is blurred. And as someone, I've had my private passwords and details stolen more times than I can count, whether it's Experian, whether it's Amazon, all these companies have been hacked. And I get these emails saying, oops, sorry. And last month I got an email from someone, I kid you not, saying, I have all your passwords, listing the passwords, and told me to send them $8,000 in Bitcoin. And so I called a friend who is more knowledgeable than I, who said, unless they send you, actual information, ignore it, they're phishing. So I give you this as a warning, but that's happening out there. And now they're hacking cars. I have a Tesla, and I'm told that they're now hacking in and stealing cars because I can drive my car through my phone. And that makes me think, well, hold on, what if I'm driving it? These things have more real, I understand what you're saying, they have more real world impact than just...
Yeah, but it's not just the car. It can be the air conditioning system. If you're in Canada and you have a room with a baby and somebody hacks the air conditioning system, it can be life-threatening to the baby or to someone that is disabled. So it's not only cars, it can be a traffic light that someone can hack into. It can be the electrical grid. It can be the water chlorine level. And you can poison an entire city. So there is higher risk today with cybersecurity because the digital world and physical world are converging. And the convergence generates a lot of opportunities, but on the other hand, it generates a lot of risks.
Yep. So you spent years as a partner at Intel Capital in Tel Aviv. You've seen hundreds, if not thousands, of startups and evaluated them for their strengths as you invest. What advice do you have as you look across the room, not only for women as investors, but also setting up companies and running companies? Do you have any advice for them in dealing with the disruptive trends and embracing them and moving forward?
So I'll say whatever you heard before here about ability to fail is important. I think that the one thing I'll say that normally people do not say is don't stop to learn. Don't stop teaching yourself and looking if you're taking the right path. I've seen a lot of companies grow, and I've seen a lot of companies that grow and then failed. And mostly it can be identified a lot of causes, but the main cause is that the leadership of the company or the investors have stopped looking outside. They become arrogant. They took the lead part and they stopped learning what's happening. Even today, we're talking about how many new technologies and new variations of new technologies exist today. If you're not ahead of your competition, if you're not ahead of yourself, you'll be left behind. So my greatest advice is don't stop learning, always read and investigate and look into not only what you're doing, but also what your competitors are doing and what your potential new markets are doing.
All right. So I have this question that's fun to ask. As you move forward and looking at these companies, what has surprised you the most? What did you not expect?
So I think that the company that surprised me the most was, I'll say, Uber. I didn't understand why it was that successful. I mean, it's so as always, as an investor, you always have things that you thought that will fail and were successful, and I think that Uber for me is one of them. I was sure that it's going to be just a buzz and it will go away, and it's still here, and I think that that's one of the challenging things. But as a technology, what surprised me the most, I think, was the biology part and the ability to emulate proteins on a computer, which I think will generate in the next 3 to up to 10 years will generate a huge leap in how we produce medicine and how we attack diseases. And I think that that's the thing that surprised me the most is how fast it's evolving in terms of medical emulations.
Excellent. Well, I want to thank everyone for coming. Does anybody have any questions or anything that you would like us to?
So it's time to ask questions.
Everyone's being very shy.
Yeah, well, so in Israel normally there is all the hands are up. So this is how we do it. So now let's do an exercise. Everybody raise your hands up if you have a question. Everyone has the questions, I'm sure. So now everybody wants to ask a question. Now we can choose. Yeah,
well,
it's good.
Hi, thank you very much for your speaking. Speaking about technology, I want to know your opinion about the laws, because I think that technology is advancing as fast as you said, but with the Internet of Things and all that. But how about regulations? How about laws? Do you think that it's moving on as fast as technology, or do you think that maybe in the future there will be like a problem with that? Thank you.
Okay, so the funny thing people don't really know, as politicians, that's my job. I make laws, I make the rules. And it's difficult. It's very difficult to know exactly how to regulate things. And a good example of that is cryptocurrencies. There have been some cryptocurrencies that flat out are scams. I'm telling you now, they are created as scams. There are other ones are completely legitimate, completely useful, wonderful additions. And so the US government is considering them securities, although that doesn't really work. So now you've got securities, you've got SDOs coming out, and you've got coin offerings coming out. And it's a bit of a mess as the whole thing kind of shakes out, because we want to be able to protect people from being taken advantage of on one hand, but we also want to enable new technologies as they come in. And so right now they have a group of people in Washington, D.C. And New York working to try and better define what is cryptocurrencies, how can these be structured in a way that protects people, and allows things to move forward as well. So that's just one example of trying to find that balance. And did you want to address that?
Well, I think that your point is right. I think that regulators move much slower than technology. And this is the main problem that exists today. But even as a society, we cannot necessarily decide what's right and what's wrong. And we can see, as you mentioned in your presentation, you have the situation in China. If you do it in the US, it's not moral to do it. In China, maybe culturally it is moral, and the government decides that that's okay. So I think that it's very hard to get to a conclusion of what's ethical and what's not ethical, and it's something that we need to work as a society and work as a culture, and especially because we live in a global world today. There is a lot of things that needs to be, we need to create these resolutions that are a little bit more in a global as humanity. What do we accept, what we do not accept? And this is something that will be challenging from our perspective. And it can happen, for example, with Amazon, that they created the iBot that is running, scanning resumes, and it took only men to the job. So because there is a bias in the database. And it's not the algorithm fault. The algorithm doesn't want to prefer men. It's the data that was fed into it that did prefer men, opposing it didn't hire any women. And I think that these are some of the problems that we do not even understand where the problem starts and where the problem ends, and the bias is a huge impact.
The other thing to remember is that most politicians, at least in the United States, are lawyers or people from other industries than tech, and genuinely don't understand. They want to, but they don't really get it. And so, I say to you, as much as you can, reach out to especially the local officials. They're the ones that are more easily available. Even my own colleagues, I had an event I held for my own colleagues in Silicon Valley, explaining to them why broadband is important. This is something pretty simple. And yet, I don't mean to pick on my colleagues, but it's just not something they really understood. And so I brought in some tech people, and we had a Broadband 101 class for the elected officials. And then they understood why it's important to put in the infrastructure to support these things. So don't assume that the politicians have all the background information that you have because you work in the industry. Reach out as much as you can to gently explain the importance of what you're doing as well, and work together to find good solutions.
Yeah, like everything, a problem generates opportunity for businesses. So if any of you is looking for an idea for a business, creating regulation bots or AI bots that are able to generate decisions or help decision makers get to these things, it can be a good business in the next few years. So any other questions? Yes. Other questions? Yes.
Hello. I have a question. Good morning. Katherine told us as an example on how technology helps in traffic. I have a big question because in Peru, we don't have traffic. We have people that doesn't know how to drive well. So
We have this too.
how there's a little line in between that. How does entrepreneurs or technology goes for the user experience or try to make stuff to have better situations, but how to deal between the technology, the solutions, between the attitude or culture of the people? I don't know if you get my question.
So first of all, I can refer to that. I wanted to ask someone that's local, how does crossword, so when you cross the road, does crossword work the same? Because I was trying to cross the road and nobody is stopping. And I was a little bit confused about how traffic, but it happens all over the world. There is, people behave like people and use advantage sometimes when there's things are not well regulated. As for a business needs to have a viable business decision behind it. So if you are able to portray how would the business, who you're selling to, that can work. So it can be an application that goes into the phone that helps parents monitor their kids. It can be someone that has a taxi station. It can help monitor the taxis, or it can help insurers. But you need to find someone that has an incentive to implement the technology, because otherwise it will be very hard. It's very hard to say, I'm building a startup to generate better drivers. You need to find a good partner. I think insurance companies in this situation can be a very good partner, because they get a lot of penalties for a lot of traffic violations, and also local law enforcement are a good opportunity to try and hunt to that. But normally these businesses are slightly harder than other businesses.
So I see we're out of time, but please know that you can grab us and ask any questions. You can also, if you look on the Menlo Park City website, I actually publish my mobile phone because I find it's easier for people just to contact me directly and answer questions and deal with things directly than not getting messages and all this. So please feel free to contact me, and I'm sure Roy would be happy to answer your questions as well. Thank you so much for having us. We're really honored to be here.